"Oh my God, how can this be happening right now?" Marcus Hollingsworth shouted into the phone, his voice echoing through the elegant wood-paneled hallway of the 39th floor at Hollingsworth Global. The Billionaire CEO paced like a wounded lion in the vast glass-walled office, his eyes fixated through the towering windows overlooking the main street of downtown Atlanta. Down below, 3 sleek black cars had just pulled up, their doors opening to reveal the South Korean delegation's strategic partners in a deal worth nearly $200 million. A deal that hinged entirely on flawless communication. "The official interpreter just called to cancel due to a family emergency, sir," Grace, his executive assistant, said urgently, still holding her phone to her ear. "There's less than 20 minutes until they're in the conference room. I've called all over the city, but no one is willing to interpret for a meeting of this scale on such short notice." Marcus loosened his Italian tie and wiped his forehead, where sweat had begun to form. 20 years building Hollingsworth Global, surviving countless economic crises, mergers, and restructurings, and now everything could collapse because of a language barrier. He knew. Koreans took communication decorum very seriously. Using a translation app or gesturing with hands would be seen as an insult. They would stand up and walk out, and that would be the end. Then, like a quiet echo from a place no one expected, a calm but clear voice spoke from the corner of the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Hollingsworth, but I speak Korean." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone turned to look at the person who had just spoken. It was a young black woman, standing quietly beside a janitorial cart. She still held a partially used cleaning cloth. Her dark gray janitor uniform reflected the soft ceiling lights. Her name was Danielle Moore, 27 years old. She had worked silently on this executive floor for the past 3 years, always on time, always quiet, always invisible. Before we continue, if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen for their abilities, not their appearance, and that even the quietest individuals can do extraordinary things, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's help spread inspiring stories like this to even more people. And now, let's return to the story where unexpected turns are still waiting just ahead. The silence was so heavy. The hum of the air conditioning above was clearly audible. Grace was the first to break the tension with a half-sarcastic, half-awkward laugh. "Danielle, you're kidding, right? This is a multi-million-dollar international meeting. It's not break time." Marcus narrowed his eyes at the woman standing before him, as if for the first time. He was truly seeing her after hundreds of unnoticed glances. "You speak Korean?" he asked, his voice filled with skepticism laced with undeniable desperation. Danielle stood upright, her eyes radiating quiet confidence. "Korean, Japanese, and a bit of Mandarin," she said without hesitation. "I majored in East Asian languages at Howard University before I started working here." For 3 years, she had cleaned the boardroom, emptied trash bins, and replaced the water jugs, but she had also silently listened to strategic meetings, learned how decisions were made, read executives' expressions, and memorized every word Grace shouted at other staff. Danielle never imagined today would come, but perhaps all that quiet time had been preparing her for this moment. Grace's expression suddenly changed from surprised to furious. "Marcus, you can't be serious. You're going to bring a janitor into the boardroom to represent the company. What will Mr. Chun think when he sees someone in a cleaning uniform as our translator?" But Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he stared at Danielle for a long moment, then said, "Say something, in Korean." 1. Danielle took a deep breath, then began to speak, her accent so flawless that even Marcus, who didn't understand the words, could feel the chilling fluidity and naturalness of it. "만나 뵙게 되어 영광입니다. 상호 협력이 우리 모두에게 유익한 결과를 가져오길 바랍니다." The room fell into absolute silence. "What did you just say?" Marcus asked. Danielle calmly replied, "I said, it's an honor to meet you. I hope our cooperation brings beneficial outcomes for us all." It's a classic greeting in Korean business culture. Formal, respectful, and full of goodwill. Marcus said nothing for several seconds. He just looked at the woman in front of him, as if weighing an incredibly risky move. Then he slowly nodded. "You have 15 minutes to prepare. Meet me in the conference room on the 40th floor." Danielle bowed slightly and quietly walked away. As the door closed behind her, Grace turned to Marcus, her voice sharp. "You've lost your mind. If this goes south, don't expect anyone on the board to save you." But Marcus no longer heard her. He remained by the massive window, eyes fixed on the delegation now entering the elevator below. For the first time in a very long while, he believed that the person who could save a $200 million deal might be the one they had all overlooked for 3 whole years. 15 minutes later, when Danielle walked into the conference room on the 40th floor, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She had swapped her janitor's uniform for a simple black business dress hurriedly borrowed from the receptionist downstairs. Her hair was neatly tied in an elegant chignon. She held a notebook in her hand. No designer brands, no flashy accessories. But the composure and poise she carried with her brought the room to a pause. Thomas, the CFO, whispered to the person next to him, "Dear God, it really is her?" Rebecca, the executive assistant, didn't bother hiding her irritation, scoffing under her breath. "Change your outfit and think you're an executive now, huh?" But Marcus said nothing. He simply stood tall and gestured for everyone to take their seats. "This is Danielle Moore," he said, articulating each word clearly. "She will be our lead liaison for the Asian market today." Across the table, the 5 members of the Korean delegation had already arrived. They remained silent, discreetly observing everything, the room's layout, people's expressions, even Danielle's unexpected entrance. The head of the delegation, Mr. Park, greeted Marcus in fluent English, but when Danielle responded in Korean with a tone that was humble, respectful, and included a thank you for their punctuality, a trait highly valued in Korean culture, Mr. Park raised his eyebrows, a mix of surprise and satisfaction. The first 15 minutes went better than anyone expected. Danielle didn't just translate words literally, she conveyed the cultural nuances as well, from honorifics and idea transitions to inserting light jokes that actually made the delegation laugh. The atmosphere in the room became natural, relaxed, and the pace of the exchange picked up. Rebecca clenched her fists, her face betraying her growing discomfort. Then, as if she could no longer bear it, she spoke, her smile sweet, yet laced with poison. "Danielle, perhaps we should share with our partners a little bit about your rather special journey here at the company. It's quite inspiring, really." Marcus's brow furrowed slightly, but Rebecca continued, her tone sarcastic yet cloaked in politeness. "It's not every day someone pulls off such a dramatic transformation. From mopping floors to senior interpreter in a single afternoon, right? I think our partners will see this as a shining example of Hollingsworth Global's limitless advancement opportunities." Danielle felt the heat rush to her face, but she didn't lower her eyes. She smiled, a calm, almost chilling kind of smile. "Life teaches us that sometimes opportunities come from the most unexpected places," she replied in English, looking Rebecca straight in the eye, her voice steady. "And yes, 3 years ago, I cleaned the floors in this very room. Now I'm sitting here with all of you. I believe that's something any company that truly values diversity should be proud of." On the Korean side, Mr. Park's expression subtly shifted, not condescending but discreetly unsettled. In Korean culture, hierarchy and role stability are deeply respected. The fact that their interpreter, the face of communication, had once been a janitor created a silent ripple. No one said it aloud, but Danielle felt it clearly. The way they looked at her had changed, from respectful to cautious. Marcus quickly spoke up to salvage the moment. "What Rebecca means is that we value talent at every level." But he knew it was too late. From that point on, Danielle no longer felt like the meeting's facilitator. She had become a phenomenon, an anomaly that the partners were now evaluating with careful scrutiny. And then, like a sudden gust of wind reversing direction, something stirred within Danielle, not hurt, but clarity. In her 3 years working here, she had cleaned boardrooms, overheard countless phone calls, witnessed failed negotiations and power games among executives, especially Rebecca. Danielle had seen Rebecca lie about quarterly numbers to appease clients, had heard her on the phone blaming black staff to protect the company's image, had read forgotten printouts with deliberately altered figures. And Danielle hadn't forgotten. Not once. For 3 years, she remembered not out of revenge, but because she knew, one day, the truth might need to take her side. And that day could very well be today. The meeting ended with a provisional memorandum. The Korean delegation, ever polite, thanked Marcus for the hospitality and offered Danielle a few kind words, but the initial spark in their eyes was gone. Mr. Park said they would review the terms more carefully, a diplomatic phrase that usually meant they might not return. As they left the conference room, Danielle stood silently by the table, feeling the air had grown noticeably colder. Rebecca couldn't hide her satisfaction. She carefully arranged the documents with exaggerated precision, as if to reaffirm who truly held control in the room. "Well, that was interesting," she said, glancing at Danielle with a look full of hidden meaning. "Perhaps next time we should clarify our staff's background in advance, to avoid any unnecessary cultural confusion." Marcus said nothing. His face was stone cold, his eyes reflecting the loss of a golden opportunity. Danielle gripped her notebook tightly, chin slightly raised. She didn't cry, she didn't react, but deep inside, something shattered, not hope, but illusion. She had once believed that talent and effort alone were enough to make people see her. But today, she understood. People like Rebecca didn't need to see. They only needed an excuse to push her back to where they believed she belonged. As she stepped out of the conference room, Danielle felt eyes turning toward her. A few managers from other departments were passing by, a few assistants whispering to each other. She walked straight ahead, without looking back, but memorized every glance, every smirk they thought she didn't notice. She didn't know if she'd still have a job tomorrow, but one thing she knew for certain. She was no longer the same person. 2 hours later, with most of the office cleared out, Danielle returned to her familiar janitor's cart, put on the gray uniform again, and pushed her cart down the executive hallway as usual. But this time, every step was calculated. She knew exactly when Rebecca tended to forget to log out of her email. She knew when Marcus left his office but forgot to lock his filing cabinet. She knew the precise angles of the security cameras, where their blind spots were. And she'd even once been asked by the maintenance crew to watch over things when they reset the system on weekends. She quietly pushed her cart to Rebecca's office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Rebecca was laughing with Jennifer, a young accountant. Her voice was loud enough for Danielle to hear every word. "I swear, if Marcus gives that girl any more responsibility, this company is doomed. She thinks speaking Korean is enough to be a coordinator. 3 years of mopping floors doesn't make her smart." Jennifer gave a weak laugh, not daring to respond. Danielle paused for a beat. She didn't enter. She simply remembered every word in Jennifer's face, the one who stayed silent. This wasn't the first time. She had witnessed Rebecca instructing HR to discard resumes just because the names sounded too black. She had seen her manipulate financial figures to impress shareholders. She had mopped floors under Rebecca's desk and seen internal memos accidentally printed with confidential data, hastily shredded afterward. And Danielle had kept a few pieces quite literally. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from an unknown number, written in Korean. "Miss Moore, we were very impressed with your composure and linguistic skills today. I have a proposal I believe you'll want to hear. Can we meet at 10 a.m. tomorrow at Han River Cafe on Peachtree? Sign it. Park Min-chul." Danielle stood still for a long moment in the empty hallway, the overhead lights stretching into a tunnel of pale glow. Inside her stirred something no longer resembling pain or submission but strategy. For 3 years, she had endured, observed, and learned. And if Rebecca thought she was just a floor mop that spoke Korean, she would let that very perception become her sharpest weapon. Tomorrow, she would go to that cafe, and this time, She would not only bring her skills, she would bring a piece of the truth, the kind of truth Rebecca and this entire system never imagined someone like her could possibly possess. The next morning, at exactly 9:58 a.m., Danielle stood in front of Han River Cafe on Peachtree Avenue, a cozy, refined Korean-style cafe. She wore a navy blue blazer that fit just right, a rounded collar white blouse underneath, and her hair softly down, neatly brushed. She had bought that outfit with her modest salary, originally intended to return to school. But this morning she knew. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the first step in an entirely new chapter. As she entered, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and distinguished presence stood up to greet her. "Miss Moore," he said in English, then switched to Korean. "Very pleased to see you again. I'm Park Min-chul. This is our Executive Vice President, Miss Lisa Han." The woman sitting beside him, in her early 40s, wearing a light beige suit, nodded at Danielle with a sharp and discerning look. Danielle bowed slightly, then replied in fluent Korean, her tone as professional as anyone who had ever sat in the executive boardroom she used to clean. And on that very morning, something unprecedented happened. For the first time, she was the one being heard. "You handled yesterday's meeting very well," Mr. Park began. "We were impressed not just by your language skills, but by your composure under immense pressure." Lisa added gently, "We're expanding our investments in the North American market, and we need people who not only understand Korean culture, but also how American businesses really operate, someone who's seen the system from the inside." Danielle paused for a moment. For 3 years, she had felt invisible, but it turned out that invisibility had allowed her to see everything. Late-night meetings, improperly discarded printouts, casual hallway conversations no one thought to censor. "I know your company has worked with Hollingsworth Global for many years," Danielle said, choosing her words carefully. "And I also know that there are things happening inside that company that are not right." Lisa nodded. "We suspect there have been irregularities in the bidding and contract allocation processes. But to take legal action, we need confirmation and internal information." Danielle opened her bag and placed a small USB drive on the table. "I didn't collect this out of revenge," she said, her voice even and firm. "I just thought, if the chance ever came for justice to speak, I should be ready." On that USB were audio clips from forgotten maintenance equipment, screenshots of emails Rebecca had sent to outside partners disclosing confidential bidding information, and financial documents that had been edited, particularly reports for projects led by Black employees. Danielle had been collecting and safeguarding these files for nearly 2 years. Lisa picked up the USB, looking at Danielle with a gaze that was half astonishment, half admiration. "I didn't expect you to be this prepared." Danielle returned a faint smile. "I've lived in the shadows of those hallways long enough to understand. Justice doesn't come from slogans. It comes from data, from patience, and from timing." Mr. Park tilted his head. "Miss Moore, we'd like to offer you a position as strategic advisor to our North American branch. Starting salary 5 times your current income, plus authority to help coordinate international projects." Danielle froze. For a second, she saw herself from 3 years ago, a young woman standing in a rundown apartment in South Atlanta, holding her mother who'd just been discharged from the hospital, heartbroken from dropping out of college. No degree, no business cards, no recognition, just listening ears and a memory that never forgot. She looked up, locking eyes with them. "I accept, but on one condition." Lisa leaned forward. "We're listening." I want to begin with an independent investigation into Hollingsworth Global. Not to bring anyone down, but to end a cycle of injustice that's gone on far too long." Mr. Park looked at her, his eyes reflecting something deep. "And if people get hurt in the process, then that's the consequence of the choices they already made," Danielle replied. "I'm just bringing light to the places they've worked hard to keep dark." Lisa smiled, and for the first time, she looked genuinely relieved. "Welcome to the big leagues, Danielle." And just like that, the woman once dismissed as the janitor who speaks Korean was now stepping into a battle not just to save herself, but to expose an entire system that once seemed untouchable. And she knew for the first time, this game was hers. That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the glass panels of the 39th floor, Hollingsworth Global carried on as usual. Few knew that a tremor was silently building beneath the surface. Marcus Hollingsworth, though trying to maintain composure, couldn't hide the irritation in every furrow of his brow as he read the reassessment report following yesterday's meeting. Temporarily postponing contract consideration. Further review of terms required. The wording was polite but cold, like a knife slicing through the reputation he had spent 2 decades building. He knew something had made the Korean delegation change course, and he also knew it wasn't just words, it was a look, an atmosphere, something intangible that had shattered in that room. Just as Marcus was about to call Grace for an update on post-meeting follow-ups, the conference room door swung open. Danielle Moore walked in, but not in her usual janitor uniform. She wore an elegant gray suit, holding a leather briefcase and a thick folder. No one had called her. No one had expected her. But she walked in with the presence of someone who knew. The time had come to speak. "Apologies for the interruption," she said calmly. "But I believe you need to see this before making any decisions, especially about Miss Rebecca." Marcus froze. That name had always given him pause. Something about that assistant had never quite sat right. Danielle opened the case, pulling out a stack of printed documents and a USB drive. Inside were the pieces she had been quietly collecting for 2 years. Leaked internal emails, altered financial reports, and a maintenance system audio recording Rebecca's voice. Unmistakable, cold, and discriminatory. Marcus read every line closely, his eyes growing darker. He played the audio recording, and for a moment, the only thing in the room was Rebecca's voice, echoing, "We can't let people like her think they belong here. Not everyone's made for this boardroom, especially those black folks who act too smart for their place." Marcus leaned back in his chair, as if struck. What he heard wasn't just an employee's voice, it was the echo of injustice he had overlooked for years. "How long have you held on to these?" he asked hoarsely. 3 years, Danielle replied, unflinching. "And I've only been waiting for a justifiable reason to bring them forward. Not out of revenge, but for the truth." A heavy silence fell. Marcus knew he couldn't bury this. Not after the Korean delegation had just requested a private meeting with Danielle the next morning, something Grace had just informed him via text. He exhaled deeply, then nodded. "I'll convene an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning. You'll have the floor to present what's necessary." Danielle nodded and left the room without another word. But her steps now were no longer hesitant. She walked like someone fully ready not just to speak, but to act. That evening, in the small apartment in South Atlanta where the wall still held the nail hole from the diploma that never got framed, Danielle sat in front of her laptop, opening a file she had named 2 years ago. Hollingsworth, Irregularities. 64 pages of documents, emails, internal memos, photographs of discarded papers she had picked up, captured, and saved. Every line was a piece of truth no one thought a janitor could possess. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "My love, how was today? I heard something on the news. Is something going on at your company?" Danielle smiled. "Things are moving in the right direction, Mom. For the first time in years, I might finally be sitting where I'm meant to be." "I believe in you," her mother said softly. "I've always known you were meant for something bigger." 1. Danielle looked out the window, where the distant city lights blinked like quiet encouragement. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing she knew for sure. Rebecca would no longer be the one controlling the game, and everything she had prepared over the past 3 years, the silence, the observation, the memory would no longer be tools for survival, but weapons to transform an entire system. The next morning, the executive boardroom of Hollingsworth Global was packed. The air was thick with tension. Everyone could sense a storm approaching, though no one quite knew from which direction it would strike. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his expression grave. To his right was Grace, looking visibly anxious. To his left, Rebecca strode in with bold steps, dressed in a striking red suit, and high heels clicking like declarations of ownership. "Looks like we're holding court today," she whispered, just loud enough for a few younger executives to hear, who responded with awkward chuckles. She believed today would be her chance to clean up her reputation after that minor slip during the Korean delegation meeting. In her mind, all responsibility had already been neatly arranged to fall squarely on one person, Danielle. But then the door opened, and the person who entered made the entire room pause. Danielle Moore appeared, wearing a charcoal gray suit, a white high-collar blouse, her hair pulled up into a sleek bun, carrying a leather briefcase. No uniform, no cart, only the composed calm of someone who was absolutely ready. Rebecca shot up immediately. With all due respect, she turned to Marcus. "I don't understand why a contract janitorial worker is being invited into an executive-level meeting." Marcus didn't even look at her. "She's here," he said plainly, "because the Korean delegation formally requested her assistance in clarifying concerns about our cooperation and contract process, and because I believe the company deserves the truth." Danielle gently placed her case on the table. "I will only present what I've observed over the past 3 years with full documentation." Rebecca crossed her arms and slumped back in her seat. "Sorry, but who's going to believe the story of a janitor who used to mop the floors here? You could make up anything and no one could verify it." Danielle didn't react. She opened her laptop and connected it to the projector. The screen lit up with the first email, subject line clearly reading, "Confidential proposed budget adjustment." Below it was a string of internal messages between Rebecca and a preferred vendor, in which Rebecca had leaked bidding information about a competing minority-owned company, a serious violation of both ethics and competitive business regulations. The room fell completely silent. Daniela didn't stop. She continued displaying one piece of evidence after another. An Excel file with altered figures to disqualify a project led by a Latino employee. An email instructing the front desk to discard resumes with 2 Asian-sounding names. A recording from a maintenance camera capturing Rebecca's voice. "I don't care how smart she is. She's still a janitor, not the kind of face this company should present to foreign partners." Rebecca jumped to her feet, her face flushed. "What is this? This is a privacy violation. She secretly collected data without authorization. She's just a malicious liar." Danielle remained still, her eyes cold. "I'm the one who was harmed by these actions. I did not access any protected system. I merely retained items that were left unencrypted, unsecured, and not destroyed as per company policy. And more importantly, I didn't fabricate any of this. Every item has a signature, a timestamp, and verifiable metadata." The director of HR spoke, his voice low and steady. "I can confirm all these emails exist on the internal server. They've been there just unnoticed or ignored." Rebecca looked around, seeking a supportive glance. But one by one, everyone turned away. Marcus sat upright, his voice steady, like a verdict. "Rebecca, you have 30 seconds to provide a legitimate explanation, or I will begin proceedings for gross misconduct and refer this file to the Trade Compliance Office." Rebecca stammered. I was under pressure. I did what I had to do to protect the company's image. I never meant to hurt anyone." Danielle didn't look away. "You protected the company's image by erasing the people who didn't fit your ideal." The room remained silent. Then Marcus turned to security. "Escort Miss Rebecca out of this building. Revoke all her system access. She is no longer an employee of Hollingsworth Global as of this moment." Rebecca was led out, her face pale. All of her usual arrogance vanished. As she passed Danielle, she muttered, "You won, but that doesn't change who you are. Daniela Metterhaze. You're right. I'm still the one who used to push a cleaning cart through these halls. But I don't need anyone to remind me of that anymore. I'm proud I was here. And now, I'm still here but in the role I deserve." Marcus rose, extending a hand to Danielle. "Miss Moore, on behalf of the entire company, thank you. And if you're willing, I'd like to offer you the position of Director of International Relations." Danielle paused for a moment, then nodded. At last, After 3 years of silence, she was finally heard. And this time, her voice wasn't just a translation, it was the voice of justice. 2 hours after that historic meeting, as Hollingsworth Global's office slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Danielle quietly settled into her new workspace, a sunlit corner on the 38th floor, where the glass windows opened to a sweeping view of Atlanta drenched in the golden glow of late afternoon. On her desk sat a temporary nameplate, Danielle Moore, Director of International Relations. Just days ago, she had bent over to change trash bags in this very room. Today, she sat in the leather chair once reserved only for those deemed influential. The internal phone rang. It was Marcus. "Danielle," he said, his voice much softer than the tension-laced tone from that morning. "Handtech just called back from Seoul. They said after your presentation, they want to officially resume the contract, and they've requested you to be their direct representative for the entire process." Danielle closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I'm ready." Marcus hesitated for a moment. "I still can't believe that the person who saved this company was someone we never truly saw. And I want to apologize, not for what I said, but for everything I failed to see over the past 3 years." "You don't need to apologize," Danielle replied, "because I didn't do this for sympathy. I did this to change how we perceive true human value." The afternoon passed in a flurry of emails and calls from partners. Word spread quickly about the woman who used to be a janitor and turned around an international deal, like a quiet ripple through the corporate world. A few congratulatory notes arrived from people Danielle once thought didn't even know her name. A few handshakes for the first time, not condescending, but full of respect. But for Danielle, nothing brought her more joy than the call from her mother. "I saw it, baby," her mother said, her voice trembling. "On the evening news. Your name, your face. They called you someone who's changing corporate culture." Danielle laughed softly, but a knot tightened in her throat. "You always said a smart woman doesn't have to shout. She just needs the right moment. And today, I finally understood how important the right moment truly is." That night, in the small apartment where she had lived for 3 years with humble dinners and quiet resolve, Danielle sat before her old laptop. She opened the folder she had never clearly named in all that time. Now, she renamed it. Future Planning. The real project begins here. She began drafting the blueprint for an initiative called Second Horizon, a scholarship program for Black students and working-class individuals who had been forced to leave college due to family circumstances, just like she once had. In the open document, she typed the first headline: "No one should have to choose between their dream and their duty." She would fund it with her own salary. She would invite international partners to join, and she would return to the very school she had to leave Howard University to announce the program. Because she knew there were people like her everywhere, silent, brilliant, and unseen, judged not by their talents, but by others' assumptions. At exactly 10 p.m., her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Lisa Han, Executive Vice President of Handtech. "Miss Moore, on behalf of the corporation, congratulations. We've transferred the initial deposit for the contract. And one more thing. The chairman would like to invite you to Seoul next month to speak at the International Women's Forum. Topic: From Silence to Influence. When the invisible begin to lead change." Danielle read that final line over and over, sitting quietly in front of the screen. 3 years in the dark. No one ever said her name. No one ever listened to her voice. And now, they wanted her to represent an entire generation of people who had never been seen. Not because she had become someone big, but because she dared to step outside the role others had assigned her. She lifted her head, eyes steady. The fight was far from over. There were still countless Rebeccas in the world. But this time, she wasn't alone. And most importantly, she was no longer the one listening in silence. Now, she was the one who speaks. 3 weeks later, a Boeing 787 lifted off from Atlanta Airport beneath a brilliant golden sunset, carrying a passenger who, just months earlier, had pushed a janitorial cart through the basement hallways. Danielle Moore sat quietly in business class, contemplative, holding a small, worn brown notebook, a gift from her mother during her first year of college. Inside were faded, handwritten words. Write down everything you learn, because one day, someone else will need that very lesson. Oh, the nearly 14-hour flight to Seoul didn't make her nervous. She was used to long journeys, the only difference being that they used to be taken in cheap rubber shoes and silence. This time, she was traveling as a keynote speaker at the International Women's Forum, alongside CEOs, social activists, and renowned scholars from over 20 countries. At Incheon Airport, a team awaited her with a name board reading, Miss Danielle Moore, guest of honor. She smiled quietly. She had once been denied entry to a VIP lounge for being inappropriately dressed. Now, they opened the car door for her and escorted her to the city's top hotel, where her room was next to the event organizers on par with senior delegations. That evening from her hotel room she called her mother. "You know what, Mom?" she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm sitting in a room overlooking the entire city of Seoul. Tomorrow, I'll speak in front of hundreds of people, but what makes me happiest is that I still remember what it felt like to hold my first mop." "Don't ever forget that," her mother replied, "because that's what keeps you grounded, knowing you don't have to prove anything. You just need to be yourself." The next morning, the forum hall was packed. Spotlights, cameras, rows of dignitaries. When the MC announced, "Please welcome our guest of honor, Miss Danielle Moore, Director of International Relations at Hollingsworth Global, who brought about a major turning point in U.S. corporate culture." The entire auditorium erupted in applause. Danielle walked up to the stage, no script in hand. She brought only her story. "I used to be called the janitor who speaks Korean," she began, her voice clear, every word deliberately chosen. "And if someone had told me that one day I'd be standing here, I probably wouldn't have believed them." She spoke about leaving school to care for her mother, about 3 years of cleaning between power-drenched hallways and entrenched biases, about silently memorizing every meeting, every discarded document, every word spoken by people who thought no one was listening. And then, she spoke of the moment she stood up, not for revenge, but to deliver the truth. "When you've been invisible long enough," she said, eyes fixed on the audience, "you have two choices. Either you believe them, or you become something they can't ignore anymore." The entire auditorium fell into deep silence. No camera clicks. Only the quiet respect of people realizing they weren't just listening to a successful woman. They were witnessing someone who had risen above the limits of circumstance. At the end of her speech, she received the longest standing ovation of the day. Reporters swarmed, but Danielle simply shook hands politely and quietly returned to her hotel. She hadn't come to build a personal brand. She had come to affirm a truth. Sometimes, power doesn't come from noise, it comes from silence, preparation, and years of quiet resolve. Back in Atlanta, a week later, Danielle resumed work as usual. She spent Monday morning reviewing a new contract with Korean partners, the afternoon in HR meetings about a new internal training initiative, and the evening calling the president of Howard University. "We'd be honored to have you return to speak to our students," the president said. "Many have followed your journey. Some even said they returned to class because of you." Danielle smiled gently. "I'll come back, but not just to tell a story." The next day, in the 38th floor conference room, Danielle officially announced her initiative, Second Horizon, a scholarship fund supporting students of color who had to leave college due to financial hardship. The fund launched with $20,000 from her own salary, plus contributions from 3 international partners she had connected with after her speech in Seoul. She didn't invite the press. She didn't stage a PR campaign. She simply stood before the company's staff, especially the logistics, security, and janitorial teams, and said, "I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to remind you that every journey to the top begins with a first step, even if it's dusty, humble, or walked over by others." And as she stepped out of the room, something unexpected happened. The same security guard who used to nod at her during late nights now stood tall and said, "Thank you, Miss Moore. You've made me believe that I was never invisible." Danielle posed, smiling. "We're never invisible," she said softly. "It's just, the world hasn't had to look at us yet." Not far away, in a cramped apartment in Queens where sunlight barely filtered through a dust-covered window, Rebecca Hayes sat on an old wooden chair, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. Displayed on the screen was the cover of Business Weekly, Danielle Moore, the woman who changed the nature of power in the American boardroom. Danielle stood beaming, surrounded by Asian executives, behind her a newly signed contract worth nearly $500 million. Rebecca closed her eyes, not out of jealousy, but because for the first time in years she had no reason left to deny what had happened. 3 months had passed since she was terminated from Hollingsworth Global. Not a single company had called back after her job applications. Some even outright rejected her once they saw her name on a public list of toxic executives under investigation for workplace discrimination and ethical violations. The red power suit that had once been her armor now hung wrinkled in the closet. On the table lay a stack of medical reports from her therapist, a diagnosis of post-traumatic anxiety. Next to them were overdue rent notices. The things she once used to judge others' appearance, resume, posture now meant nothing, because she herself had become the one being judged. At night, when all the lights went out, Rebecca found herself replaying that morning in the boardroom. She remembered Marcus's eyes when he stood up for Danielle. She remembered the hushed whispers in the hallway as she was escorted out between 2 security guards. But most of all, she remembered her own reflection in the restroom mirror for the first time, not as the powerful female executive, but as a woman who had lost everything for holding on to a belief she once thought was truth. That power comes from stepping on those weaker than you. She reopened Danielle's soul speech for the 3rd time that week. This time, she didn't close it halfway like before. She sat still and listened to every word. When you've been invisible long enough, you have 2 choices. Either you accept that they're right, or you become something they can no longer ignore. Rebecca cried, not because Danielle had won, but because she, despite once being in a higher position, had lost long ago and never realized it. She had never let anyone see her true self. Only a hardened shell, built from prejudice, fear, and delusion. In a rare moment of honesty, she opened her email and began to type. To Danielle Moore. Subject: I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want to thank you for your courage, not just for yourself, but for the people I never had the courage to name. What you've done has shown me that true power doesn't come from pushing others down, but from helping them rise. I don't expect a response, but I hope that one day, I too can start over the way you did. She hit send, then sat still. The next morning at Hollingsworth Global, Danielle entered the boardroom with a new file. In her hands was a nationwide expansion plan for Second Horizon, partnering with 4 universities and 3 corporations. Marcus greeted her with a respectful nod. Danielle, he said, did you see the email from Rebecca last night? She paused for a beat. I did. What would you like us to do? Danielle looked out the window. Outside, Atlanta was slowly glowing again after a night of rain. Cars rushed by. People folded back into familiar rhythms. But she knew that somewhere a different Rebecca Hayes was probably watching the new day with different eyes. I don't need anything, Danielle replied gently. What I needed I already have. As for her, maybe she's just beginning to understand the weight of things she once dismissed as meaningless. You're sure? Marcus asked. You have every reason enough to sue, to seek damages, to take this public again. She's already crumbled, Danielle said. And some defeats don't need another hand to press them down. What we need now is to build something better from what's left behind. Marcus nodded slowly, thoughtful. Danielle left the meeting room, feeling neither light nor heavy, just at peace, because at last she had turned her long-ago silence into voice, not to seek vengeance, but to remind the world, never underestimate those who were once not allowed to speak, because one day They'll be the ones rewriting the rules. 6 months later, the 38th floor of Hollingsworth Global had transformed more than any restructuring proposal ever submitted. The nameplate on the office of the Director of International Relations had been replaced with a gold-plated plaque. Danielle Moore, Executive Vice President, Global Strategy and Equity Initiatives. With her new title, Danielle wasn't just leading international deals, she was also the head of an internal initiative praised by media outlets as the moral reset of corporate America. The program, called Equity in Action, focused on eliminating hidden biases in HR policies and empowering talents who had long been overlooked in the shadows. Under her leadership, the company had signed over $400 million in strategic agreements with partners in South Korea, Japan, and Singapore, surpassing all prior performance benchmarks. But what made her proudest wasn't found in numbers. One Friday afternoon, as the office gradually emptied, Danielle remained at her desk. Laid out before her were the first scholarship applications for Second Horizon. 20 students from rural towns, disadvantaged neighborhoods, and communities no one expected would make it to college. She read the application of a 19-year-old girl who had dropped out of school to care for her mother after a stroke, and suddenly saw her own younger self reflected in those short, honest lines. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Jennifer, once Rebecca's assistant, now a regional operations manager. "Sorry to bother you," she said, a bit hesitant. "I just wanted to say thank you for not just changing this company, but for changing the way I see myself." Danielle smiled. "I didn't do anything grand," she replied. "I just stood up when the moment came, and you can do that too in your own way." After Jennifer left, Danielle opened a drawer and took out an envelope, Rebecca's letter. She hadn't deleted it, but she also hadn't replied. She didn't need to, because her response was being written every day. In every email she sent to universities proposing partnerships. In every HR policy she helped revise with her team. In every moment she paused in the hallway to ask a janitor how their day was going. That evening, she returned to her new apartment in Midtown. Not far from the office, but higher, brighter, and warmer. On the wall hung her official diploma from Howard University, completed through night classes. Beside it was her newly earned MBA from Columbia, completed through an executive program. Next to them was a photo of her mother beaming during her first ever first-class flight, booked by Danielle herself. Her phone rang. It was the host of a national television program. "Miss Moore, we'd like to invite you to a special edition of Women Who Lead, alongside founders, doctors, and top advocates. Would you be willing to share your journey?" Danielle paused for a few seconds. "Absolutely," she said softly. "But I won't talk about how I used to be a janitor. I'll talk about how I learned everything about power, while others assumed I didn't exist." The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. No one knew that every Monday, Danielle still made a point to personally wipe down the handles of the executive boardroom with a sanitizing cloth. Not because there was no one else to do it, but because she wanted to remind herself. Every time she walked into that room, she wasn't just representing a title. She was representing everyone who had ever been dismissed for not looking the part. As she took her seat, Marcus entered, holding another magazine this time, Forbes Women. "Congratulations," he said, placing the issue on her desk. "Top 20 most influential women under Macy. They called you the woman redefining what modern leadership looks like. Asterisk." Danielle looked down at the cover. Her face smiled confidently, but her eyes drifted to the subheading below. Not everyone who enters through the front door is the best fit to lead the way. And it was true. She hadn't entered through the front door. She had come through the back halls, the fire stairs, the storage rooms, but it was in those spaces that she had watched, learned, remembered, and when the moment came, she stepped forward, not asking for permission, not knocking, but making her own way, because she knew those who were once invisible, once they are truly seen, can never be forgotten again. And just like that, the story of Danielle Moore comes to a close. From a quiet woman who once cleaned meeting rooms no one noticed, to a leader driving international deals and transforming corporate culture from the inside. She showed us that true power doesn't lie in a title, but in perseverance, dignity, and the courage to rise when no one believes in you. If this story moved you, share it, so more people can be reminded that no matter where you come from, what job you do, or how others may look down on you, you still deserve to be seen. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so every time someone rises above prejudice and speaks their truth, you'll be the first to hear their story. I've already selected a few other videos I believe you'll want to watch. They're waiting for you, right next to this one. Wishing you a day of strength, clarity, and deep inspiration.